None of us knew what to expect when we, a group of young female POWs, were escorted into the old administrative hall the guards called the screening room. The doors were thick, wooden, and when they closed behind us, the sound echoed like a warning. No shouting, no threats, no rough handling, just silence. And somehow, that was even worse. In the center of the room sat 3 officers, calm, expressionless, their uniforms perfectly pressed, their hands resting on their knees. One of them looked at us and spoke with a tone that allowed no refusal. "Sit down. On our laps. One at a time. No talking." The air froze. We exchanged terrified glances. It sounded humiliating, bizarre, and completely wrong. But there was something in their eyes, not cruelty, not desire, something colder, procedure, as if we were nothing more than subjects in a strange protocol no one had bothered to explain. The first girl, Marta, stepped forward. Her hands shook. She slowly lowered herself onto one officer's lap, stiff, trembling, ready for the worst. But the worst never came. He didn't grab her. He didn't touch her improperly. He didn't even look at her face. He only lifted her foot slightly, inspected her boot, her heel, her skin, and made a quiet note on a clipboard. We didn't understand. Were they checking something? For marks? For injuries? For diseases? For signs of escape attempts? We had no idea. All we felt was fear. Next. And so began the part of our captivity we never spoke about after the war, not because it was violent, not because it was shameful, but because no one would ever believe how strange and how cold the truth actually was. They didn't want our bodies. They wanted information. Information they believed only our feet could reveal. We didn't speak as the officers continued the strange procedure. Every step felt colder, more precise, more mechanical than anything we expected from captivity during wartime. When it was my turn, my legs nearly gave out. The officer didn't even look at me. His expression stayed blank. The same detached look someone might have while checking equipment, not a person. I sat on his lap, tense as a wire. He didn't touch my waist, shoulders, or arms. Instead, he gently lifted my foot, turned it slightly, examined the heel and sole, and checked the inside of my boot. Then he spoke quietly. To the other officer taking notes. "Mark her as Category B. No signs of frostbite. No lesions." I froze. Category? What? Before I could think further, he tapped my arm with the back of his knuckle. Not aggressively, just a signal. "Next." I stepped aside, still shaking, joining the others in a silent line. It wasn't until the 4th girl sat down that something finally slipped through the officer's emotionless routine. The moment the man lifted her foot, his expression tightened. He pointed to a dark patch on her heel, a discoloration caused by exposure to cold. The note officer scribbled fast. The commanding officer said, "Category D, immediate transport." The girl's face drained of color. We didn't know what Category D meant, but the way they exchanged glances said everything. She wasn't staying with us. 2 guards approached, took her by the arms, and led her toward another door, not the one we came through. No one dared ask where she was going. The hall felt colder than before, colder than the winter outside. Only then did one of us whisper, barely audible, "They're checking who can survive the march." It hit us like a blow. This wasn't humiliation. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't anything anyone ever accused them of later. It was a screening, a grim, clinical assessment of who was physically strong enough to be transported to a distant camp before the winter storms hit. And the truth we never spoke about? We were chosen, or discarded, based on what our feet said about our chances of surviving the journey. After they took the Category D girl away, the hall fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were listening. All of us stood frozen, except one. Her name was Elise. She had always been the bravest among us, or maybe just the one who could no longer tolerate being afraid. As the next girl stepped toward the officer, Elise suddenly whispered, "Why our feet? Why this?" The officer inspecting the boots paused for the first time since the process began. The room stiffened, not because he was angry, but because he was surprised that anyone had dared to speak. He slowly looked up at her, his face illuminated by a single overhead lamp that carved deep shadows across his features. "Because winter is coming," he answered, his voice low and almost tired. "And most of you won't survive a long march if we don't know who can still walk." His tone wasn't cruel, it wasn't mocking, it wasn't even authoritative. It was practical, coldly practical. Elise stepped forward, her fists clenched. "Then why the lapse? Why make us sit like this?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He looked at his gloved hands, then at the young woman sitting nervously on his knee. Finally, he said, "Because when you sit, the tension in your legs disappears. We can see the real state of your feet, not the pose you try to hold." It made a terrible kind of sense. Standing, we could hide the pain. Sitting, the truth came out. Elisa's jaw trembled. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was furious. "So, you decide our fate based on that?" The note-taking officer finally spoke. "Based on who can make the journey without collapsing. The others would die on the road." The words hung in the air like frost. Elise opened her mouth again, maybe to protest, maybe to scream, but before she could, a guard stepped in front of her. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't shout. He simply said, "If you speak again, you'll be examined separately." And everyone in the hall knew that separately was never good. Elise slowly stepped back into the line, shaking, her fire dimming into helplessness. But something had changed. Now we all knew the truth. This wasn't cruelty. This wasn't humiliation. It was selection. A cold, emotionless system designed to decide who would survive and who would not. And the worst part? We were starting to understand why they did it. The inspection continued. Slower now, heavier, almost suffocating after Elisa's outburst. Each girl stepped forward, sat on the officer's lap, lifted her foot, and waited for her category as if waiting for a sentence. Category B. Category C. Category B. Then the officers paused. Not because of Elise, not because of fear, but because of the door. It was the same narrow door through which they had taken the Category D girl earlier. This time it opened just a few centimeters, enough for a silhouette to appear, a shadow, broad shoulders, a coat with a fur collar, but not a guard, someone higher. The officer taking notes straightened his back instantly. The silhouette spoke in a low, commanding voice. "How many left for the transport?" The seated officer answered. "One so far, possibly 2 more." The shadow paused. Then, "No mistakes. We can't lose anyone on the road this time." The door shut again, and something in that sentence chilled all of us more than the icy air outside. This time. Which meant they'd done this before, and people had been lost. Not because of cruelty, but because the march itself was deadly. Snowstorm routes, frozen fields, days without shelter. We weren't prisoners to them in that moment. We were weights, numbers, bodies that needed to reach another camp alive. The next girl, Lydia, stepped forward. She was quiet, small, barely 18. When she sat on the officer's lap, her legs trembled violently. Not from fear, from exhaustion. The officer touched her foot. She winced in pain. He lifted it higher. The sole was cracked, raw, bleeding in places that had been hidden while she stood. The note officer exhaled sharply. Category D. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. She didn't resist. She didn't argue like Elise. She only whispered, "Please, I can walk. I'll try." The officer's face remained carved in stone. Trying won't keep you alive out there. He tapped twice on the table. The signal. 2 guards approached. Lydia reached out to us, desperate, her fingers trembling, her voice barely a breath. "Don't let them—" The guards lifted her by her arms. She was too weak to keep her feet under her. And then, the worst moment. The door opened again. The same silhouette stepped inside just long enough to look at her. Then he said, coldly and simply, "Send her." The door closed, and Lydia was gone. Not dead, not hurt, just gone, taken somewhere we would not see. Somewhere only Category D girls were sent, and none of us knew which fate was worse, being chosen for the march, or being sent through that door. After Lydia was taken, the hall felt like a tomb. The lamp above us flickered, casting sharp shadows that made every face look hollow, exhausted, older than we were. Only 3 of us remained unexamined. When the next girl stepped forward, even the officers seemed slower, not kinder, but burdened. Their movements were mechanical, like men carrying out a task they didn't like but had no choice but to complete. Category B. The note officer nodded, then the next girl. Category C. And then, my turn. My boots were stiff from cold, but my feet weren't wounded. When the officer lifted my heel, I forced myself not to flinch, not out of bravery, but because I feared Category D more than anything outside those walls. He inspected my sole, pressed lightly at the arch, and then said with a flat voice, "Category B, she'll march." I exhaled shakily. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified, because soon we learned the truth. The march was canceled. Not because they changed their minds, not because of mercy, but because a blizzard hit the region hours earlier than expected. Roads vanished under snow. Columns of prisoners on other routes had already been lost to the storm. A guard stepped into the hall and announced in a cold voice, "Transport impossible. All categories remain here." Just like that, Elise stared at him, stunned. "Even the D girls?" The guard hesitated. The only hesitation we ever saw from any of them. Then he answered, "There will be no second selection." No one spoke after that. For the first time, the officers actually looked at us. Not as numbers, not as bodies to move, but as human beings who almost became victims of weather and classified categories. The hall slowly emptied. The officers left with their ledgers. The guards retreated to their posts, and we were alone. We never saw Lydia again, or the first girl they took away. We never found out where the Category D door led. But we lived, not because of strength, not because of fate, but because of snow. A blizzard did what we could not do ourselves. It stopped the march, ended the selection, and locked the officers behind their own decision. For the rest of the war, none of us ever forgot the chill of that hall. The cold wasn't from the winter outside. It was from the moment we realized our lives depended on our feet and on a storm.